so I'm going to jump right into it. So we have seen the dangers of misinformation, even more apparent at the peak of the pandemic. We see a surge in hate speech, especially during election session. I would like to start with Joanne, if I may. Representing the giant tech industry, how would you define disinformation and hate speech in the online context? And what are challenges that you see, especially for educators and students, maybe trends that you might have seen in the recent years or months?
Sure. And I think Nani did a great job earlier as well, so just want to call that out for disinformation. I think one thing that we are talking about is the very intentional aim to spread information that is known to be incorrect or fake. Right? So disinformation is when it's very intentional. Disinformation can be sometimes information that is spread unknowing that it's incorrect or unknowing that it's false. That said, while there's that distinction, it's also important to know that sometimes disinformation, and the lines are very blurry. It could be that it starts as disinformation, so someone's very intentionally sharing something that's incorrect, and then it goes to someone who doesn't realize it's wrong, and then they propagate it. So while we look at the issues, the fundamental core of the issue might be quite different, the ways to address it sometimes are quite similar, and the lines aren't always so clear. Is it disinformation? Is it very intentional? Is it misinformation because the person's just not so aware? And when it comes to hate speech, I think how we look at it is it's speech that condones violence against certain groups. It could be with regard to race, it could be with regard to religion, sexual orientation. So it promotes violence, it promotes hate, it promotes and it could be to an individual, it could be to groups, and that's how we look at it quite broadly. When your question, Alina, about what's the biggest challenge?
Yeah.
I think it's the fact that in an online space, things can move quite fast. The scale and the reach can be quite broad. So I think that's one challenge to note. But that's it. I don't want to paint a picture of tech or being online very negatively. I think there's so much good that we can get as users, as educators, as students from being online. So I think we always have to be mindful when we talk platforms like this, where we talk about issues like disinformation, also realize that shouldn't close us off to technology or be afraid of technology, and just always be aware that it's a force for good. And yeah, I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Joanne. You mentioned about how tech is very fast, and with a lot of tech advancements, it's often so fast that laws and regulations are often naturally would lag behind. So YBTO, I would like to ask, how would you define misinformation and hate speech, and what are the consequences of spreading false information and hate speech here in Malaysia?
Okay, good morning, a very good morning to everyone, also to the lovely panelists. Actually, I think Joanne answered very well. I think the definition of misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech, I don't think my answer will be vary from hers very much. When you talk about the consequences, of course there are several laws in Malaysia. For example, actions can be taken under Penal Act, Penal Code. Action can also be taken under Section 233 of the Communication and Multimedia Act. Actions also can be taken under Seditions Act, which of course doesn't have a good reputation in Malaysia. And these days, yes, stalking is also a crime in Malaysia, and therefore action can be taken under anti-stalking law as well. However, I think the challenges we have these days is always like, how do we identify who are the person who intentionally spread misinformation, hate speech, and disinformation? Because one of the challenges we have on the online space is who is really behind that particular account and who is behind that photo is always a challenge. And as a government, as a law enforcer, challenge for them to retrieve that type of information from the platform provider can be quite challenging. For example, 3R are sensitive issues in Malaysia, in Malaysian context. but it might not be, it is not a crime in, for example, US, etc. And therefore, if the police want to start the investigation because they, individual, a certain account, Facebook account, or some media social account actually makes certain hate speeches or touch on the sensitive issue of 3R, we might not be able to retrieve the IP of that particular person because that is not a crime in the other country as well. So that is the challenge we face for law in terms of law enforcement. When law enforcement have this type of problem, it is even more difficult for the individual who want to clear their reputation. For example, as a political party, as a politician as well, there are a lot of misinformation about my party, about what is the about the DAP, I will put it this way, about some of my leaders, for example, Tan Sri Lanka. It's so easy for people to say that he was born in China. Even until recently, this also become the issue. Or to say DAP is related to Israel. You know, all this kind of information. And then I think there was once people said that Teresa Kok is a cousin of Lee Kuan Yew, something like that. And also Tony Hua, of course, because he studied in Singapore for a few years. So I think once he was called Singapore agent. And so on and so forth. So it is indeed not easy, even for a political party and even for a politician, to identify who is that, the source of information, the source of the person, the source that will make this type of misinformation or disinformation, and then to take actions. Because again, if you want to sue somebody for defamation, I need to first of all be able to identify who is that particular person. But we all know that when this information is being disseminated intentionally, a lot of fake accounts are being created for that type of purposes, and therefore I think this is the danger. I totally agree with Joanne that it is not our intention to say the internet is not is a dangerous place and everybody should quit for using internet. That is not the intention. But I think at the same time, we must make sure people are well educated and aware of the danger of the social media. I think that's it. Actually, I went to gym this morning, so I was on the treadmill, I was looking at one video. They actually said that maybe 2024 would be the last human elections in US. What does it mean? It means that where people are still making the choice, by perhaps even after that, AI involved. We have a lot AI using the AI technology where they can actually influence your choices, and they decide what you will receive, what type of information you will receive on the media, social, etc. And therefore, everything will be calculated to lead to that particular outcome. And that's what the person actually said. 2024 might be the last human president election in US. Of course, I think to what extent this is true, we need to you need to see how things develop. But I think the danger whereby platform provider, we have so many platforms, freedom of speech, whereby difficulty to identify the source, combined with AI technology, where large amount of fake information can be disseminated. I think all these are the things that we need to be aware of it when we want to be an active social media user.
Thank you, YBTO. I think it's very important that we identify what is ignorance and what is malevolence, because then malevolence usually, I mean, we can reduce, with ignorance we can teach. With malevolence we can try as much as possible to reduce the damage for that. And that's why I think it's so important that we have education, that we're speaking about how to counter.
Well, but how do we ensure that what they share can be critical but at the same time ethical? So how do we ensure that? And also, I mean, we want to give them space because we do not want to stop them from not voicing out. But how do we ensure that what they are voicing out is not, against the 3R, for instance? How do we know that it's sensitive? I mean, they are sensitive enough with racial issues, religious, and all that. So as an educator, that is challenge. there is only so much that we can do. Like you said, now I have the MOOC and modules and classes and all that, but at the end of the day, it goes back to